part of the Earglue Media family of podcasts.
You're listening to Petticoats and Poppies.
History Girls at the Movies.
Welcome to Petticoats and Poppies, History Girls at the Movies. We're your hosts, Maggie and
Nicole. So since Maggie and I, along with basically everyone else on the internet, watched WandaVision, it felt like the right time to review this period drama that we're going to talk about today because Elizabeth Olsen played the lead. I've actually been meaning to watch this film for a really long time because it has some of my favorite actors in it, and it felt like doing this episode was a great excuse to get to watch it.
It was certainly a movie that we watched. I kind of felt like I was watching some sort of like Tumblr fever dream where Poe Dameron hooks up with Wanda Maximoff and then plots to kill her husband Draco Malfoy.
It is a fascinating, convergence of like Star Wars, Marvel, Harry Potter, and then Jessica Lange is there. Like,
yes. So a little like American Horror Story, it's all good. So the film that we are talking about today is In Secret. It is also known as Therese. It is the 2013 American film that was written and directed by Charlie Stratton. It is based on the 1867 novel by Émile Zola called Thérèse Raquin and the 2009 stage play by Neil Bell. It stars, as we already said, Elizabeth Olsen, Oscar Isaac, Jessica Lange, and Tom Felton. And Wikipedia calls it an erotic thriller romance film. And it certainly is all of those things.
It certainly is. It certainly is. So I've been meaning to watch this movie forever, and I hadn't yet, and woo boy, it's an experience. It's a real experience if you've, been living alone in quarantine for a long time. First of all, I'd like to say the fact that Matt Lucas is in this truly cracks me up.
And Moaning Myrtle.
There's some fascinating people in this movie.
Oh wait, and that dude from Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yep. I love to see a story with cousins marrying each other.
Love it.
Super romantic. Love to see it. I do think that like the film's greatest thing about it is its casting. Like, Tom Felton is so perfect for the role of Camille to the point that I kind of feel bad for him because like it's not a role that you would want to be perfect for.
And he was so good.
He's so damn good in this role. Obviously, Oscar Isaac is also fantastic as Laurent, and by fantastic, I just mean really hot. But I also think, like, Elizabeth Olsen does really well with this role of Therese, who's a very interesting character. And I think that the way that the film handles, like, female sexuality is really interesting. This movie, I'm just gonna say it, this movie is so horny.
So horny.
And you know what? Like, I relate to the character of Therese, and that like I too would risk it all for Oscar Isaac. Like, I can get down with that. I like the bit where he's like, Therese, do I own you? And she's like, completely. I'm like, me too. But God, this is becoming a running theme on this podcast, is me just like talking about Oscar Isaac.
Here for it.
Throwback to the Promise episode. I think that the film like does some really interesting things. The use of foreshadowing in it, I think, is really good. Whenever they show the corpse, wow,
terrifying.
It's so scary. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I'm very worried I'm gonna have a bad dream about that at some point. The performances though, like, are genuinely great. I think especially Jessica Lange does a really fantastic job. Also, Tom Felton, like, I also have to say, they did a really good job of, like, a solid 2/3 of this movie. I was like, I really want things to work out for them. Like, yes, they're murderers, but I want to see it. I want to see it work out. I want to see her be happy.
Hey, sometimes murderers deserve happy endings.
Right? I will say, like, the third act feels way too long. It
so
definitely drags. And it's not a great movie, but with this cast, I don't care.
Truly. I feel like I'm just going to like echo a lot of the same thoughts that you had, like no thoughts, head empty, just thinking about Laurent hiding under her petticoats and woo.
Yep.
Oh, to die in Oscar Isaac's arms. Like you said, I too would risk it all for Oscar Isaac. So I'm just gonna like get that out of the way.
As
That's
all
just,
rational creatures would.
especially Oscar Isaac in a period piece. Like,
With the sideburns?
oh, the sideburns.
Yep. Yep.
This movie is so horny that I had to keep pausing it.
It's like needlessly horny, honestly. Like, I get it. I get it that it's largely about like her discovering her sexuality and whatever. But there was a point where I was like, I get it. They're having sex. Like, can we move on?
It was like when he had her up against the wall that I was like, this is too much. I need to take a break.
I cannot fathom that people saw that in a movie theater.
A friend of ours saw this at TIFF on full screen.
Oh, God. Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
I would have simply perished, simply died. Like you said, Tom was just like so brilliant in this role. I was like, my sweet boy, you are having the time and a half in this role, and you did not deserve to be killed. There's like a point where he like skips off camera, and I was like, he's such a sweet boy.
I was like,
Like,
Camille.
I was like, you don't deserve to die. They're very mean for killing you. However, I will say I did think for a brief moment when he was like, I'm the husband. I was like, okay, yeah, you know, you deserve to die.
Yep,
I was
same.
like, yeah, it's over. Just like by the point where like Laurent starts being not nice, I was like, yeah, you need to go down the stairs.
Yep.
That's a wrap, chap. But yeah, this movie just like had so much potential to be like a really compelling like Shakespearean tragedy. It had like all the hallmarks of it. There's romance and affairs and murder and poison and crazy mother-in-laws and like nosy friends and like all of these components that make for like this really compelling story, and then they just absolutely drop the ball. With that third act just being so drawn out, and I don't know, like I feel like it was just a pacing issue because like I'm fine with like the poison thing at the end. I saw some reviews where people didn't like that, and I was like, no, really, they had no way out. They were caught. They were gonna get hung. Like,
Yeah.
that whatever. Poison works, but I felt like they rushed it so much at the end that like it didn't really give that like moment.
I felt like it should have had more of an
weight.
emotional impact than it did.
Yes, it didn't have any. And then I don't know why she was still drowning afterwards. Like, I have a real issue with like drowning. Like, you know this about me. Like, it's a do not watch for me. So like I had to like look away, but like I was like, oh, they're dead, no more drowning. And then they showed like the body in the water, and I was like, why? Needless. I don't need to see that.
Terrible.
Thanks for the nightmares. That nightmare that she had was like so like well done. I was like watching it through my eyes, and I was like, well, I know what I'm going to be having a nightmare about tonight. You dream about the corpse, I'll dream about drowning.
Fantastic.
It'll work. Thanks so much, cast.
So, for one of the topics, I actually wanted to talk about the novel that this is based on, because I do think it has like an interesting history. It was Emile Zola's like first novel to really reach critical success, and it's probably still his best known. Like, whenever I think of Emile Zola, I associate him with Therese Raquin. I'll be honest, I haven't read it. It's one of my blind spots. It's one of those ones that's like been on my TBR list for forever. But it was first published in serial form. It was called Un Mariage d'amour in the magazine L'Artiste in 1867. And it was published in book form later that year under the name Therese Raquin. I don't know why they called the film In Secret. It also sometimes was called Therese. Confusing to me. Whatever. It's actually a really short book. According to Goodreads, it's only 201 pages. Which makes me feel even worse that I haven't read it. But the book, actually, from what I've read, details Therese's whole life, like from childhood to marriage to sort of this passion with Laurent, widowhood, her second marriage, and finally their suicide. Zola was sort of which I'm going to talk about him more later, but he sort of was the father of this new literary movement of naturalism. And so he believed in like establishing characters in an environment and then sort of letting their actions play out as if conducting an experiment, which is interesting. And he, in the preface to this book, said that he wanted to study temperaments and not characters with the story of Therese Raquin. You can imagine when this came out in 1867, there was a lot of conservative outcry over the book because of how, raunchy it is, I guess you might say. Which is interesting in that it does kind of seem like the message of it is that, sexual pleasure will lead to destruction. Like, for having this affair, for doing what they do, Laurent and Therese, get what they have coming to them, you could say. But famously, a review of this book in the newspaper Le Figaro called it putrid, which is hilarious to me. But this novel set up a lot of the themes that would be seen in Zola's later work and the naturalist movement, which he would really move into sort of coming out of this book. It shows a very grim version of Paris. One of the themes that's more present in the novel than the film is sort of this idea of the countryside versus Paris, and Paris as a sort of gritty world. I also thought this was interesting. In the movie, it is talked about that Therese is illegitimate, but in the novel, apparently her mother is Algerian, or
Really?
some form of African, which would make her a biracial character, which is interesting. I love Elizabeth Olsen in this part, but obviously I would have loved to have seen them actually cast it as such, and I think that does give us a very different read on the marriage between Therese and Camille, in that, maybe the idea is that they thought that she really couldn't do any better. I will say, the end section of the book sounds a lot worse than the movie. There's apparently a whole part, passages where, Therese deliberately provokes Laurent into beating her. And obviously, we have, a small bit of that in the movie, but not to the level it sounds like occurs in the book. I'd be very interested to talk to anyone who's actually read it. So what I also thought was really interesting, though, is Therese Raquin was first adapted into a play in 1873 by Émile Zola himself, and it was first staged in London in 1891. In the past 20 years, there have been 8 different stage adaptations of this novel. There's also 2 operas. There was a Broadway musical based on it called Thou Shalt Not, with music, get ready for this,
oh no,
by Harry Connick Jr.
What?
I don't know if a cast recording exists. I may have to, look that up.
I do like Harry Connick Jr., but
I just don't see him fitting this material at all. But there's a ton of adaptations of this. There was a play by Neil Bell, which premiered in 1991 at the Playwrights Horizons Theatre School. It later was staged at La Jolla Playhouse with Paul Giamatti playing Camille, which I thought was interesting, in 1994. And that play premiered in New York in 1997. That's had a lot of different productions. There was also a new UK musical in 2014 with music by Craig Adams and book and lyrics by Nona Shepherd that had Julie Atherton as Therese and Ben Lewis as Laurent.
Ben Lewis?
Yes, I was like, Maggie will be excited about this. There apparently is a cast recording that was made in 2015, so you might want to check that one out.
I might have to go find that. Mm-hmm. I do like Ben Lewis.
There have been a ton of different film and TV adaptations of Therese Raquin. The first film version that I could find was a silent Italian film made in 1915.
Oh my God.
There's at least a dozen film and TV adaptations, a lot of them in Spanish and German, which I thought was interesting. And there's also a BBC series from 1980 that had both Brian Cox and Alan Rickman in it.
Who was Alan Rickman playing?
He played a character that is not in this movie. It is a artist friend of Laurent's.
Okay.
Yeah, I also was like, wait, hold on. So I think it's interesting in that Therese Raquin is something that has been adapted sort of over and over and over and over. And it does kind of make me be like, really? And this was what you did with this movie? But there haven't been many major film adaptations of it in the past 50 years. So I guess I do sort of feel like at some point we will probably see another adaptation of this novel to the screen that hopefully is able to sort of stick the landing better than this one does.
Yes. And now talking about sticking the landings, I'm going to be talking about Poison. I thought it would be nice to just do like a brief just discussion about the specific poison that's talked about in the film. So dear FBI person who is assigned to me, I promise you that I just did all that research today for the podcast. Please don't show up at my door. I'm not planning on poisoning anyone. Please, listeners, do not take this as advice on what to do to people. Don't poison people. Do not try this at home. So, Laurent procures prussic acid to kill rats. This is one poison that truly means business. It is a rapidly acting poison that enters the bloodstream and is transported through the body, and essentially you die from asphyxia. You may know prussic acid by another name, which is hydrogen cyanide.
Oh, yeah.
Cyanide is in fruits that have pits, such as cherries, apricots, apple, bitter almonds, which is what becomes almond oil and the flavorings come from. If you've listened to our Crimson Peak episode, you will remember me discussing cyanide poisoning at length in that episode as well. This is apparently my thing now. Yay. But the Victorian era had this like fascination with poison. It in fact is known as the golden age of poisoning.
Yes.
There were a lot of different very sensational cases of women murdering during this period of time. One such case was Madeline Smith's trial in July of 1857, where she was accused of murdering a lover of hers who had been blackmailing her. Essentially, she wanted to end the relationship. I guess they'd been sending some very scandalous and lewd letters to each other, and he threatened to like expose her, and so she poisoned him with arsenic.
I actually did a paper on her for a history class at one point.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah.
Nicole, what does this say about us?
I find poison fascinating in this time period.
So fascinating.
I also like, obviously, especially arsenic. I feel like shows up in a lot of books, like
oh yeah,
Madame Bovary.
I mean, there's a whole play, Arsenic and Old
Peace.
Lace.
Like, yeah, we love a book, a movie, a play, where someone poisons someone with arsenic.
Oh, yes. There was also the acquittal of Adelaide Bartlett, who definitely murdered her husband, Edwin, by poison. I can't remember what the specifics was, but she got sent off somewhere, so she got acquitted, but she like didn't get off scot-free. And all the medical community was like, now that the trial's over, she has to tell us for the benefit of science. Like, how did she do it? And then, of course, there was Britain's mass murderess, Mary Ann Cotton, who murdered 4 of her husbands and over 8 children. All of these were like very sensational, front page headlines. Everyone was talking about it. And the reason why poison was such a big thing in the Victorian era was because of rats and because of other rodents. People, especially in cities like Paris, were looking for ways to rid themselves of pests. And so poison was a super easy thing to acquire to facilitate murdering your pests in your life. So yeah, it made perfect sense to me that Laurent was going to do this. I don't think they would have died quite as quickly as they did.
It feels better than her plan, I won't lie.
I was like, when she pulled that knife out, I was like, please just put it down and go with his plan.
Right. I was like, and apparently in the novel, it's more of like a big thing that they're like plotting to murder the other person. And then they kind of see it and they're like, oh, well, we could just both do this.
Yeah, it's honestly like, I think they would have been in like pretty horrific pain.
They make it seem like pretty damn chill.
They just like take a little nap.
Yeah.
I mean, cyanide is a fairly swift thing, but I don't think either of them consumed enough. I'm not going to give out specifics of how much it would take to kill a human because I definitely found that out today.
Yeah.
But I think that they both would have had to have drunk a whole bottle of the prussic acid that he purchased to act that quickly.
Yeah. I love too that scene, like like, does he think he's being sneaky?
He's like, clink, clink, clink. Laurent, dear, I think she knows what you're doing. And then she's sitting there with this giant knife that she just sharpened.
Right, I'm like, where exactly was she hiding that knife?
In the picnic basket.
It looked bigger than the basket.
It did. I was like, this feels like a really weird Sweeney Todd. Okay, wait. Speaking of Sweeney Todd, sorry to derail your next conversation, but when they were talking about somebody getting chopped up and put into pies, I was like, what? Yeah. At Domino's. I was like, are you talking about Sweeney Todd?
Yeah. I was like, what's happening here?
I was like, I do love murderous couples, but this is some weird, I guess, illusions. And then they die by the sea river.
That's true.
So that's why I was like, oh, murder's about to happen.
So I also wanted to talk a bit about Émile Zola because he's a really interesting figure. So Émile Édouard Charles Antoine Zola was born on April 2nd, 1840 in Paris. He was a novelist, journalist, critic, playwright, and political activist. Even though he was born in Paris, he actually grew up in Aix-en-Provence in southern France. His father was an Italian civil engineer, but he died in 1847 when Émile was still a young boy, and he and his mother were not very well off financially. I thought it was very interesting that he was actually schoolmates with the painter Paul Cézanne, and that would sort of come back and influence him later in life. He attended lycée in Paris, but he failed the baccalaureate exam twice, which meant that he could not go to university. So he lived in poverty for several years before he finally was hired as a clerk at a publishing firm. I think maybe you could almost read something a little bit semi-autobiographical into the character of Laurent for Émile Zola, but at least whenever we first meet him. But Zola began writing for various periodicals, as well as continuing to write his fiction, as he had been writing since he was a young boy. His first novel, La Confession de Claude, was published in 1865. It's a very sordid tale that his employer did not like. So luckily, he was already earning enough as a writer from his journalism work as well to support himself and his mother, so he left his job. Thérèse Raquin, the work for which he is best known, followed 2 years later in 1867. In 1868, he began his 20-novel series, which is called Les Rougon Macquart, which was inspired by Balzac's La Comédie Humaine. Each one of these 20 novels essentially featured on a different member of the same family, which made me think of the Bridgerton novels.
Incredible.
Which is incredible, yeah. But he published about one a year between 1870 and 1893. I would like his work ethic. He was very important to the literary school of naturalism, which he's considered the father of, and the development of theatrical naturalism as well. He published a whole bunch of essays on it. And essentially naturalism, from what I could understand, is applying literature to scientific concepts of determinism, which is that character, temperament, and behavior are determined by hereditary, environmental, and historic forces, and the experimental method, so sort of objective recordings of precise data in controlled environments. It's confusing to me. I'm not going to pretend that I'm fully explaining this. But his works were often sordid and sometimes caused his associates to sort of turn against him. They were often banned. He also really didn't shy away from criticizing the French government, in particular the Franco-German War, which obviously did not make him super popular. But he was also an art critic, and he was known for defending the work of the Impressionists, including Monet, Degas, Renoir, and of course, his old friend Cézanne. They did eventually have a falling out because he critiqued something that they didn't like.
Alrighty then.
Right. He was also friendly with other writers like Gustave Flaubert, Guy de Maupassant, and they often gathered at his home in Médane, which is outside of Paris. And the other thing, other than writing Thérèse Raquin, though, that he's probably best known for is his involvement in the Dreyfus Affair, which Alfred Dreyfus was a Jewish French army officer who was wrongly convicted of treason in 1894. And it actually was this big, long controversy. But Zola determined early on that he thought that Dreyfus was innocent, which was true. And so he wrote this open letter, which became very famous, which is called the J'accuse letter, because he opens it with I accuse. It condemned the French general staff and military officers, the War Office. He went after specific people, and that was published on January 13th, 1898. He was prosecuted for libel and found guilty, and so he actually fled to England for about a year, and he eventually was pardoned. But his intervention helped tamper down the militarism and the anti-Semitism in France at the time. So that's actually considered like one of the most important things that he did. He was nominated for the first and the second Nobel Peace Prizes in literature in 1901 and 1902, and he died in Paris on September 29th, 1902. This gets very interesting. So he dies from a blocked chimney flue, which makes him die of coal gas asphyxiation, which basically like carbon monoxide poisoning. Most people thought it was a tragic accident. But some people think it was murder. People think that someone went in and purposely blocked the chimney. His wife was also in the house at the time, but she survived. She got out in time and he did not. His mistress, who he had been with for like 18 years and had 2 kids with, though, was like one of the main people at the time who thought that he had been murdered. And he did have a lot of enemies. So like I can see why people might believe that. But I just thought that was a very interesting story. He's now buried in the Pantheon. He was buried elsewhere and then moved there later amongst other authors like, Victor Hugo. I've actually seen his tomb the last time I was in Paris. And he's regarded like not only as the sort of the greatest French novelist of that time period, but also as a really important activist. And a lot of his works have been adapted to the screen over time, more like further back in earlier film than recently, but I would not be surprised if we see more of his work, coming to the screen eventually.
So what you're telling me is that we need to adapt some of his work.
That's precisely what I'm saying. Or just do a better adaptation of Therese Raquin.
And I feel like Oscar should just play the role again.
I was literally thinking we'll just hire Oscar again. Yeah. But yeah, I thought he's a very interesting figure, for a lot of different reasons, and I think that this work makes a lot more sense whenever you sort of look at the rest of who he was as a person.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. So as always, it is now time to talk about costumes. So this isn't a costume detail like at first, but I just want to say that the HMU like absolutely nailed the aesthetic that they were aiming for with Tom. He looked so sickly, so frail, and just so pathetic. And like greasy in a sick way and not in a get way. And I just thought that was like deserves like a moment to shine in this podcast, because I just thought it was like very well done. And I will like echo a lot of what historical costume fans have said about the film. Like despite the film's flaws, they pretty accurately depict getting undressed in historical costuming, like throughout all of the intimate scenes, which is like often overlooked to seem like sexier in other productions. So kudos where kudos are deserved. Like in particular, the fact that like she keeps her corset on for like most of the little interludes, because that stuff takes some time to lace up. Yeah. And if you're trying to like get it on in the front of your shop when your mother-in-law's upstairs, like you're not going to be taking it all off.
Right.
So I know that, it'd be super hot if they did, but like that just wouldn't work. So like that was really great. I was very happy, as were most of the people that I looked up and saw. I'm starting to feel like this podcast is becoming a Pierre-Yves Guéroud podcast, because he also did the costuming for Three Musketeers, The Promise, Albert Nobbs, and of course Matt Damon in The Bourne Identity. Nope. How to throw that out? You see, if we keep doing movies that Pierre is the costumer for, I'm going to have to keep.
It ain't gonna have him. I'm just saying.
I'll find a way to connect it to Matt Damon. Don't you worry, dearie.
I know, you just need more of a challenge next time.
I do like a good challenge. But like with these costumes, like across the board, the costumes were pretty solid for the time period and the locations that they were trying to evoke. None of them, aside from her going out boozing dress, like really caught my interest. I like the weird like tassel thing she made for herself to wear.
Same.
I was like, I would do that too. If I was on the outs with my husband Oscar Isaac, I'd wear something frilly like that to go to the bars.
Icon behavior.
Icon behavior. But I also felt like her costuming really depicted the way that she was starting to unravel. I wasn't super big fan of the hair in the film, but like that's par for the course because apparently nobody wants to do historical hair in historical films.
I did feel better because at first in those early scenes, her hair is down and I was like,
Yes.
damn it. And then once she was actually in the city and she was married, her hair was up. And I was like, okay, maybe they're trying to like do one of those. Like her hair is down because she's a child in the countryside.
Yeah, and she's in the country and it's all good. But I was not super impressed with the women's hair in the film.
Agreed.
Especially for Paris, and that they were like trying to like fit in with like this like slightly posher group of people like the Beetle and all that kind of stuff. But I guess that's what Matt Lucas was. I never really caught what his role was, but when he was like saying that he like was down in the morgue a lot, I was like, okay, he's definitely a Beetle because that looks like the Beetle costume that like I've used for like Les Mis. And like Matt Lucas just like fit that costume really well, personality wise, because it's always like I feel like in every historical piece, the Beetle is kind of like a bumbling fool.
Yep.
And so he like as soon as I realized that was Matt Lucas, because at first I didn't think it was Matt Lucas, I was like, that's just somebody who looks a lot like Matt Lucas, but it's not Matt Lucas. And then I was like, by God, it is Matt Lucas. And then when he showed up at the shop in that costume, I was just like, yeah, of course he's the Beetle. But yeah, I think all the costumes were really quite lovely. I did like her wedding dress. I thought that was nice. It had nice sheen to it, but not like Three Musketeers sheen. Her morning dress was nice.
I appreciated that she was actually wearing
a morning dress.
Yeah.
I will say I was surprised that she was wearing a purple dress for her wedding. Because I think I might be wrong.
I think purple was allowed for half mourning, so maybe that's what they were doing.
Yeah, I guess that. I was like, correct me if I'm wrong. I think purple is allowed, but it was hard to tell exactly how far into the timeline we had moved into. And I think that's where I was like, is it too soon?
I think they mentioned something about it having been a year, which would be
I totally missed that. That would make sense then. For some reason, I was thinking it had been like 6 months. And I was like, I don't know, like, maybe it's because you're young. But I liked the dress. The dress was lovely. And everything they put Oscar in was beautiful. But, I mean, you'd have to work, like, really hard to make him not look good in a period film.
Truly.
I mean, if somebody wants somebody to do it, I'm up for the task. I'll make Oscar Isaac look bad in a period piece. But yeah, this film was aesthetically very pleasing. I mean, Lizzie is adorable in historical clothes, and I would love to see her in another historical film. She has a really good face for it. There was like one point where like some stuff was happening, and I was like, this is Mary-Kate and Ashley's little sister. I used to watch her in their videos. And then I was like, ah!
So, I wanted to read some of the Letterboxd reviews for this movie because they crack me up. And there are some that I cannot read on air because I'm not trying to get, an explicit rating on this podcast. But here's some excerpts. This one says, that girl would do literally anything to have sex with Oscar Isaac. Same.
That was yours, right?
I actually wasn't. Obviously the book was better, but the book did not have Oscar Isaac in it, so who is the real winner here? Let's see. I can't read that one. I cannot read that one. It's very funny, though. Wanda Maximoff and Poe Dameron murder Draco Malfoy, the movie.
Oh my god.
Let's see.
I didn't even see that before I said it.
Things Oscar Isaac does in this movie: tells a woman to unbutton her blouse, hides under a woman's skirt and goes down on her, is shirtless multiple times, has sex standing up, says the words, I need to touch you, kills a woman's husband to be able to bang her more often, slips so much tongue. I don't know how I am alive after witnessing this. That short bastard will be the end of me. This one just says, I too would kill a man for Oscar Isaac Hernandez Estrada.
Same.
When Oscar Isaac simply made eye contact with Elizabeth Olsen and she immediately got so horny that she had to frantically open the window. Mood. I too would do
coming
anything.
Out of The Force Awakens.
Oh my god. Like, okay, I too would do anything in order to get down and dirty with Oscar Isaac. I really am not one for period pieces, but all I know is that Oscar Isaac can me up. Let's see.
This is so magical.
Moon Knight, Scarlet Witch. This film answered the question, what happens if you get too horny? And apparently the answer is murder.
This is true. Can confirm.
Maggie, you need to go and like read some of these because there's some that like I can't not read out loud but are
I'm pulling up Letterboxd right now.
Good. Let's see. Proof I would do anything for Lizzie Olsen and Oscar Isaac, including dealing with Tom Felton's hairline in this movie. And that is your cousin. Yo, that is your cousin in all caps. I also like this one that says, this is actually a good film. You guys just don't understand art.
Oh my god.
All right, I'm gonna... Let's see. I need to find like a good one to end on. Okay, a few more. Elizabeth Olsen's bear growl hits differently. Oscar Isaac sure is a warm and hearty meal. I think we all know what I watched this for. Me too. And finally, and like, please, if you're listening to this, go and read these Letterboxd reviews because they are incredible. Okay. A lot of ellipses. When Oscar Isaac was under her skirt and her aunt came in and gave her tea, I had to stop the movie and drive to the nearest church.
I paused that scene like 3 times myself. I was like, I don't know if I can keep watching this.
It just truly is amazing that nearly every single Letterboxd review is people just being like, Oscar Isaac, nice. Yeah, I just wanted to share those because whenever I went to log my own Letterboxd review, I was really cracked up that everyone else was on the same page.
I love how like wildly varying the reviews are. Some people are like 1 star. Some people are like 5 stars.
But they all like say the same thing. There's just like very different ratings.
Oh my god, straight people are wild. Oh, I love this one. Well, happy birthday, Oscar Isaac. They watched it on his birthday this year.
It's also like, it is kind of funny in that it's one of those things where like, this is far from Oscar Isaac's best performance. Like, Oscar Isaac is an incredibly talented actor who's given many great performances. This might be the hottest he's ever been in a movie, though.
It truly, truly is.
No, I want to make like a quadrant of like Oscar Isaac attractiveness in film versus Oscar Isaac great performance in film.
It needs to happen.
I feel like we've derailed this podcast. You know what? It's time to go. It's time to go before we say something that we regret.
Regret. Albert, can you just like just cut that? No. So before we go, I wanted to give a shout out to one of our listeners and a dear friend of mine, Tish, who has launched a new podcast called Black Women Watch. So go over to Twitter and follow her at BWWThePod.
Thank you so much for listening to our 23rd episode of Petticoats and Poppies, History Girls at the Movies, where we review period dramas. Not always good ones, but they always have something to talk about.
We'd love to hear from you on social media and to hear what you think of In Secret.
I'd love to hear what you all think of In Secret.
I'd love to know.
You can find us on social media at HGATM Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find Maggie at Maggie of the Town, and you can find me at Nicole Ackman 16.
You can listen to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and on the Earglue Media website, and even on Audible. If you like what you hear, don't forget to leave us a rating over on Apple Podcast or on Podchaser. Every few episodes, we'll be reading our reviews, so please be sure to leave us one if you would like to be featured.
We'll be back soon with another episode as we continue to look at period films from a history and film perspective. Until then, stay safe and healthy.
You've been listening to Petticoats and Poppies.
History Girls at the Movies. We'll be back soon with another episode as we continue to look at period films from a history and film perspective. Until then, stay safe and healthy.
And horny.
No. I laughed so hard, I grabbed my chest Chris Evans style.